So the name of my talk today is, well, it's about Peppa Pig. It's not about fingerless fish, I'll get to that. But not seeing the wood for the trees, I put as a subtitle. The reason for that was really to kind of link this to sociology, in that some of the neo-Marxist Gramscian ideas of having people think more about themselves as individuals and be more concerned about what they and other people around them are doing, and maybe not seeing institutional influences that are at play. And a lot of what I'll be talking about briefly, in any case, relate to how a lot of the ideas of the consumption of animals, not just in terms of food, but in terms of media consumption, is intergenerational. So it's passed on through culture, through family, from one generation to the next. I was going to talk a little bit about anthrozoology, just because that's my official discipline, but I do sociology within that. And the fact that I'm fairly new to this as a role, not as a presenter, I'm a lecturer as a job, but that as a researcher, I'm a noob, as they say. So I've done quite a lot. Most of my work, thankfully, for the anthrozoology masters I was able to deal with animal issues. And towards the end, it got a lot more vegan when I realised that that was going to be okay and I wasn't going to get downgraded for it. So that was super. My current focus at the moment, and the focus of this presentation, is about children's television. And I know that there are, I'm in great company here with Kate and Matthew, and also Brett Mills, who I think is here today as well, who have written about animals in television and media and whatnot. I'm going to focus on some quite specific contradictions that I feel need to be addressed, and hopefully try and get those out there and get people to change what they're doing. I'm keeping a Scottish focus, or UK focus at least, only because that's the TV that I can view. So very briefly then, anthrozoology is multidisciplinary. So although sociology is in that, and I've highlighted sociology, social psychology and politics there as being kind of the ones that might deal more with structural issues, but there's a whole bunch of other fields of inquiry within the discipline that lend themselves a lot more to more biological facts and cognitive processes and whatnot. But I'm going to be focusing on the cultural elements of things. And I've said a whole bunch of stuff there, but ultimately what I'm arguing, and what probably most of us are arguing, is that veganism is the way to kind of deal with all of this, the inconsistencies, the indoctrination and calculation into this idea of us just eating meat because that's what we do. And I know that that's, again, specific to culture, but that's it's worth highlighting, especially in the UK. So that's some of the papers I've written. Most of them are unpublished. The one at the top is currently, well, forthcoming, hopefully, and deals with a lot of the elements of the others. And that's the one I'm going to focus on today for the most part. So yeah, if anyone has a spare PhD or some funding going, I'd be very grateful. The Peppa Pig Paradox then, so-called, inspired by taking my 4-year-old to a live theatre show a couple of years ago. She was 4 at the time, she's 6 now. I've been vegan for 21 years. I've been an activist for all that time, less so given having a little person than in previous times. But when we went to the show, we stopped off for a drink before the show started, and I noticed all the little girls, mostly girls, were there with all their Peppa finery, little handbags and stuff, boots with Peppa on the side. And I'll explain a bit more about who Peppa Pig is, but she's clear. She's a popular cartoon character that certainly the UK, actually worldwide. And while we were there waiting to see this show with all these great pig characters that everyone loves, there was some kids tucking into a ham sandwich. At the break in the show, you could order a sandwich box for the kids, a snack box that contained cheese or ham sandwiches. There was a Peppa Pig cinematic experience that we took my daughter to later in that year, and the queue for the hot dog stand was, along to the ticket booth. So these kinds of things always struck a chord, with me, as to how inconsistent this is. This pigs you're eating and pigs that you say that you love. So, going back briefly to Peppa, Peppa's been around for quite a few years now. She's on 6 times a day on mainstream TV in the UK. She's watched worldwide. She's over 300 episodes have been made, translated into 40 plus languages in 180, nearly 200 countries. And she's incredibly popular with preschoolers. So you're talking up to the ages of 5, up to the age of 5. She's the most popular licensed kids product in the world. And she's the top YouTube kids channel with 16, 17 million subscribers at the moment. So we're talking about a franchise here that's huge, worth 1.35 million apparently. And she's essentially an anthropomorphized family there of pigs, and Peppa's the star of the show. Her dad and her mum and her little brother are they oink, they splash in muddy puddles. They are pig-like. As I think Brett Mills once said, their piggishness is inescapable. It is, they're clearly pigs. They're meant to be pigs, but they have a human-like life. And you can see there on the slide of her, a wee girl down there with her Peppa rucksack. There's a lot of money to be made with Peppa as well. And I'll get to the inconsistencies with that shortly. So, as I've said, millions of children love Peppa, but they also eat pigs. And that is something that, while there's been a lot of work about people who love animals but eat animals, it's a lot more generalised. This is very specific to the species in question. And that really struck a chord with me. Even my daughter now, she's going into primary 3 next week. She'll be telling everybody about the Peppa Pig Paradox and probably annoying a bunch of parents along the way. So there's a whole bunch of psychological research being done into what's known as cognitive dissonance. I mean, this is going back decades, actually, since it was first coined as a term. The fact that people understand that there's something kind of wrong with it, but that they don't really know what to do. So they're in this kind of state of flux where they're feeling uncomfortable and they have to try and protect their psyche, I guess, from the inconsistency. They have two options. They either alter how they think about animals, or they alter whether or not they eat them. So most people tend to alter their beliefs rather than their behaviour, which is why, again, as vegans, we're in a minority so far, although that's changing. And a whole bunch of work has been done on the different reasons that people give for continuing to eat meat or for eating meat in the first place. And I've listed some of these, but for the benefit of time, there's not time to go through all of that stuff. But the 4 N's of meat eating come from Melanie Joy's work in social psychology. She had 3 N's initially, and then Jared Piazza and his colleagues added another N of nice. Some people eat it just because they like it. That seems to be a good enough reason, apparently. The 4 Ds of meat eating that Hal Herzog talked about, sometimes it's just that it tastes nice, the deliciousness of it. Even though it's dead, just don't think about that part. And all that psychology is all well and good, but the psychology of having a belief still has to come from somewhere, which is where sociology comes in. So my and many of your arguments will be that actually this norm maintenance, how we're socialized into believing society should be, has always been, is beneficial to us because of, is what's at play there. So I've mentioned a few different things that I think lead into or feed into sociology, although some of them are social psychological. But I guess it's kind of the same thing in a lot of ways. So I've mentioned habitus there. So for those of you that read Bourdieu, well done, first of all. But also, I think his ideas of this being, our field of life, what we're used to, being partly responsible for our belief system. The fact that speciesism exists. And although I've said anthropocentric superiority, I do recognise that anthropocentrism, believing that humans are more important, and speciesism are not necessarily the same. So they're not one and the same term. Melanie Joy also talked about carnism, the fact that we have schema and that we tend to allow things that fit into our schema, and we filter in and out what matches up with it, so that we are consistent in our, or we think we're consistent in any case. And then ultimately what it comes down to a lot of the time is how we talk about animals. So how we classify them into different, whether they're edible or inedible. And as Kate and Matthew have done a lot of work about, where they sit on the scale of being subjects or objects in terms of how we deal with them, whether we see them or not. And that links again into Carol Adams' feminist work as well. So all this stuff is part and parcel of the same issue, which is that society has created a situation where we don't think about what we eat enough. We do as vegans, but most people don't. So the Peppa Pig Paradox is dealing with not just the fact that, we've got a dog at our side, perhaps we're looking after the dog, but also we are eating a fish supper for dinner, at least that's what we call it, fish and chips in normal language. And I would argue that this is to do with what's known as strategic ignorance. So people are choosing not to know because there's a bunch of different reasons, but it's often easier not to know than to know and then have to make a change to your life. Not everyone's as lucky as me. I went vegan overnight, virtually from reading a leaflet. But other people take a little bit more persuading, as we no doubt know. So for strategic ignorance, or pig ignorance as I've called it, since that's also a pejorative term that we use for people that should know better. There's 4 different categories of consumer. There's people who struggle with what they eat. They're still not quite sure what to do. There's people who cope by going, oh, okay, this isn't really what I was aiming to do. I'm more compassionate than that. So they change their view and their diet often to veganism, or at least vegetarianism. There's the people who are indifferent, so they genuinely don't care what they're eating and how it's killed or anything like that, not bothered. But then there's this group of people who do know, who probably do care somewhere, but who still choose not to make a change, not to get the information that might make them have to do it. They purposely avoid it. And that's the pig ignorant that I speak about. Social norms allow this to happen, and the people invested in maintaining those norms allow the continuation of them. It's kind of interesting because here's what kids start to learn. This is where it goes back to this fundamental, raising of people into our culture. So wherever that is, whatever that is. This I found while I was doing some research, and I thought that this word provides here. No other animal provides society with a wider range of products, like it's purposely, willingly given. What do bees give us? Honey, miss. What do cows give us? They give us milk. What do sheep give us? They give us wool. Like they've relinquished parts of themselves for us. And you can see the range of stuff there if you don't already know that humans have been provided with, allegedly, by the pig or the hog. So kids believe, and there's been some research into this very recently, that there's a mutually beneficial relationship between animals and us, in that we feed them and protect them, and then they give us this stuff in return. But that's incredibly problematic, but that's how we're teaching them. So as long as that's how we're teaching them, even using the word meat, the word in itself is just a word that's used for stuff that you eat, rather than that's a piece of dead animal. So it's these kinds of narratives and this type of discourse that needs to change, especially when the implication is that it's given to us purposely and willingly. When I'm fairly sure, though I'm not a pig, I wouldn't be happy to do that. So the Peppa Pig Paradox, as you can see, sometimes it's less subtle than even just language. I mean, there it is right there, a ham sandwich that's quite clearly shaped. Actually, this is one of the better ones I've seen. I've seen some pretty awful versions online, but it's quite creative. There's a beef tomato, there's some Lolo Rosso lettuce, very lovely, very healthy. And on the top, shaped like Peppa the Pig, are pieces of pig. Not just one type, but a couple of different types. I think that's a pepperoni cheek. In any case, not that subtle. And how kids manage not to even question the fact that they love Peppa and they're eating a pig is the really fascinating element of this. That just shows the level of disconnect that's going on. Pork is one of the most widely consumed meats in the whole world. 36% of the global population eat pig products. It's the most consumed meat in the world. So this is not just like Peppa's the most popular kids TV character in the world. Pork is the most widely consumed meat in the world. It's really quite interesting. And when people raise issues, interestingly, they don't raise issues about Peppa. Most recently, and I don't know, those of you in the UK will remember this, Piers Morgan, our delightful people in the US might be familiar with Piers as well. Percy Pig is a kind of jelly sweet that Marks and Spencer, who are a big store here, have produced for 28 years. And they introduced a veggie version at one point. That was fine, but then they decided the whole range should go vegetarian. People lost their minds, including this. There's a whole, I'm not going to play the clip, I'll let you fish that out yourselves. Piers Morgan, who's, this is one of the most widely watched BBC, sorry, not BBC, crikey, it's on ITV, morning breakfast shows. He was absolutely raging. Go and get your own sweets. You don't be messing around with our sweets. So it's really quite interesting how people had a really big issue with that, even though Percy Pig contained gelatin, pork gelatin, these sweets. The nation's favourite sweet in the UK, according to a recent poll that was took about 2 hours to get through on a weird channel here. No one, meantime, was bothering about Peppa Pig. and the fact there's a strawberry jelly available, widely available, in a handy pig shape that's actually a mould that you can make your own. So you can't see the back of it there, but it's like, anyway, you can make your own Peppa Pig jelly after you've eaten the one that you've bought for 50p. And as you'll see, although it's gone a bit wonky, gelatin is in the Peppa Pig jelly, where there's no need at the minute legally to define which animal, or to be clear which animal the gelatin in a product comes from, but predominantly it's gelatin from pigs because it's the cheapest available for manufacturers. So all cows and fish and other, just about any mammal actually as well is put in there. So there's a real issue here about inconsistency of behaviour, not just from a general love animals, eat animals, but from a love pigs, eat pigs perspective. Applied it again, and I know I'll be limited for time, so I'm just going to scoot through the rest of it. But another piece of work that I did was about looking at fish, because people have fish in the house as pets, or goldfish, or well, any other kind of fish. We rescued one recently. It's only got one eye. It's a bit wonky. It's very cute. But kids keep fish. Kids get taken fishing by their dads. Kids go to aquarium or aqua prisons, as Joan Doniger would have put it. But they also, one of their favourite foods is fish fingers. Interesting. What was particularly even more interesting is that our national aquarium in Scotland, Deep Sea World, that's just a bit of history there about how I came to having this idea. Deep Sea World in Scotland has on its menu fish. So here it is, the Bridge Cafe. I don't know if it's open again yet. I imagine it may be. You can buy fish and chips, and the kids can have fish goujons, and you can get lunch in the Deep Sea World party, and you can go and see the sharks and all this kind of stuff. It seems a little bit odd that nobody sees the problem, particularly when, well, wait a minute, I've got all my little doobly bits going on there, particularly when lots of kids have gone to see Finding Nemo, and there's Bruce the shark telling them, in your face telling them, fish are friends, not food. PETA had a great, they'll make very good use of this eventually when they were allowed to, after the movie came out for Finding Nemo. So that's odd. So they've got Peppa loving, pig eating children, and we have fish finger eating aquarium visitor children. It just seems a little bit strange. My dissertation looked to investigate this a little bit more. Why is it that people do this, and why did they not see that it's a problem? In the interest of time, because I only have a few minutes, I won't go through it, but just a couple of highlights. So I had a fairly decent sample for a postgrad dissertation, I felt. 13 of the 40 plant-based respondents agreed to say a little bit more about why they went vegan, and for all of them, and this was particularly interesting, it was information. Information made them go vegan, not an experience with an animal, like a petting zoo or a zoo or an aquarium or any of those kinds of things. It was information. Education seems to be the thing that makes a difference, not an experience with an animal, and that was particularly interesting. And there are some other studies that support this, or rather I should say this supported a bunch of other studies, since they're a lot more academic than I am. Information about animals and the logic of veganism made the difference for these people, not the fact they love animals or the fact that they had an experience with a pig at a sanctuary or anything like that, although those are also excellent, and I recommend a couple up here. So particularly interesting. One last addition to the examples here is Timmy. Those of you familiar with UK animation may know about Wallace and Gromit, which is a popular series. I suppose Aardman Animations created it a while ago. They had a character in there called Sean the sheep. Timmy is Sean's little cousin. It's all very complex family arrangement. Anyway, he's the only other example on regular mainstream kids TV in the UK that is an animal that would be considered edible by people here. I don't think it warrants quite the same attention at the moment, because lamb consumption is hugely less, it's much less than pig consumption. That's not to say it's not important, but if we can get the pig thing organised, then everything else should follow. Well, at least that's the idea. So Timmy is there, I think every day, but I mean, they stopped producing this a few years ago, and now it's just reruns, but it is very, very popular. 1/3 less lamb is eaten than pork in the UK. Sorry, in the world actually. Sorry, I beg your pardon. So there's nearly 53% household penetration, as they put it, of lamb, but 86% of households eat pork products, second only to beef at 91%. So that's particularly interesting. That said, I don't think that cows have although they're one of my favourite animals, don't have the cuteness factor for kids as piglets and certainly lambs. And there's another thing. Kids go to city farms and feed the lambs. There's a picture of one little child doing just that. They feed them at springtime, then they go home on Sunday, Easter Sunday, and eat their lamb leg, or leg of lamb, as it's put, which again is problematic. And there's maybe a disconnect between maybe thinking it's a different kind of lamb. I don't really know what's happening there. Anyway, I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, and I feel like I'm rushing a little bit, but I'm just going to pause on the last. I mentioned there about mass nouns. Often, the further down the food chain, if you like, an animal is considered, the more likely it is that the actual name of the animal is used. So for a lot of the times, cows and pigs aren't called cows and pigs, they're called beef, pork, bacon, sausage, whatever. Lamb is still called lamb, chickens are called chicken, turkeys are called turkeys, fishes are called fish. So that mass noun kind of almost separates from the individual animals that are there as well. And again, this is not my research, it's been done by other people, but very relevant to this disconnect that continues throughout childhood. And then by the time you've got your chance to make your own choices, it's almost too late. And you have to rely on some activist passing you a leaflet at the right time in your life to make a difference. A really interesting quote here just to finish up from Jonathan Safran-Foer, who you'll probably be familiar with, maybe be familiar with his work. When I was 9, I had a babysitter who didn't want to hurt anything. You know, chicken is chicken, right? My brother and I looked at each other, our mouths full of hurt chickens, and had simultaneous, how in the world could I never have thought of that before, and why on earth didn't somebody tell me moments? I put down my fork. His brother incidentally didn't. So we have to figure out how to make those kids, all the kids, put down their forks, essentially. Why did they not? There are some independent vegetarian kids who have chosen, despite their family continuing to be meat eaters, they've chosen to be vegetarian, and they do so for moral reasons. Family vegetarian children, again, not my research, someone else's. Family vegetarians who, you know, they belong to a vegetarian family, only half of those claimed to be vegetarian for moral reasons as well as taste and whatnot. Non-vegetarian kids didn't really care about the ethics of things at all. That said, the sample was very small. All of these references and quotes and whatnot will be on the paper that hopefully will be published in not too long a time. But given that pigs are as complex and intelligent as the kids that are watching them, and probably the dogs that are lying there too with the kids watching Peppa Pig, it seems really interesting that nobody sees it, and if they see it, they don't care enough about it. So some way of making that connection is important, and that can only be done through education, all the different ages of socialization, family, community, culture, media, education system itself, and then eventually we might get to the capitalist producers of the goods in the first place. Who knows? The green pound is getting stronger, so that's quite good. Ultimately, I hope then that this pig ignorance I was talking about will eventually become a thing of the past. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.